Okay, welcome back. This is part 3 of the lecture on art and power. Sorry that the last one got kind of interrupted by poor behavior by dogs and small children, but we're moving on. So now, since I have enough time, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this page. Um, First of all, we have talked about the LG for Spanish Republic, but I want to just kind of briefly give you some little more information about Guernica. So you may have read in the book, you may remember that Guernica was painting that Pablo Picasso painted after he was living in the US at the time, and he had read a news story about the war going on in Spain, the civil war between the leftists who were, the Republicans, as they were called, the pro-republic forces versus the pro-fascist forces. And the pro-fascist forces, with the aid of the Germans, had basically blanket bombed a small city named Guernica. And when Pablo Picasso read about it, he was so upset, so furious, he felt he had to make this painting. It's a ginormous painting, and it's a massive statement about about the atrocities of war. And one of the things I think that's kind of interesting is that sort of like using those kind of warm, different kind of warm and cool, but mostly warm grays, and using that kind of texture of these kind of like dotted sort of lines, and it really kind of creates the kind of impression of receiving the news, like in a literally in a newspaper. And I did want to talk a little bit about Gerhard Richter and Anselm Kiefer, and about the importance, like we've been talking about political art, and I think sometimes it seems for in the US and for us and as contemporary artists, it may seem like just a very personal choice as to whether an artist is political or not political. But I think sometimes in certain contexts, artists pretty much feel like they have to deal with politics and history because of the situations of where they live and the times that they live in. And I think for both, Anselm Kiefer and Gerhard Richter, that is definitely something they felt compelled to do. Not that they really had much of a choice, because for Kiefer, he really felt like being a German artist required confronting the legacy of, of Nazism, of the Holocaust, and of those tragedies. And for Richter, the complicatedness not only of that inheritance, not only of the inheritance of the past of Nazi Germany, but then the complication of Germany being, split into two, half of Germany being communist, but also run, essentially run by forces loyal to the Soviet Union. That that kind of divided history, divided world that the Germans experienced was very much kind of a part that he felt he had to, express in his art. And won't have time to talk about all the art on this page. If we had more time, I'd love to talk about the Joseph Beuys piece, but maybe some other point. But I do want to talk about Sunflower Seeds. So why is this a political work of art? What is this about? So Sunflower Seeds is an installation piece where Ai Weiwei fills large spaces. It repeats in various places. In this case, this is at the Tate Modern, and it's a huge space. It's like the size of a football field. It's huge space, and he's filled it about maybe a foot deep, maybe 2 feet deep, filled it with sunflower seeds. And as you walk across these sunflower seeds, they kind of crunch and they kick up a certain amount of dust. And it's a little bit odd. And at first, you're not quite sure why until you realize that what you're standing on is not a pile of actual sunflower seeds. Each one of these sunflower seeds is a hand painted piece of ceramics. He hired a village that worked for years painting and firing, making these sunflower seeds. And so the piece is kind of an ironic statement about China, because the metaphor of the sunflower was a metaphor that Mao, who used to be the leader of China, used to say basically like Mao was like the sun and China was like the sunflower, meaning that China would turn and face him whichever direction he went in. And he was basically saying, China will do whatever I tell China to do. And here Ai Weiwei is kind of spinning that on its head and but he's also making a statement about the sheer size of China, the sheer number of people who live in China, and the power that's related to that. And so it's both somewhat a critique of the Communist Party in China, but it's also um, something of both a nationalist statement of pride, maybe, but also a warning in a way about the power of China. So it's an interesting piece. And I have enough time to talk both about Kehinde Wiley and then end on the Jenny Holzer piece. And so I think Kehinde Wiley is a great example of a contemporary artist who is thinking about how to make political statements in subtle ways. And for Kehinde Wiley, his primary way that he's making statements is by taking the compositions and structures of um, of 17th and 18th century paintings, primarily Baroque and Rococo paintings. And these are paintings primarily of rich and powerful people, people who are lords, dukes, kings, right? He's taking paintings of these powerful nobility of Europe, and then he's peopling them with contemporary people, people who are not nobility. And at first, they were entirely paintings of people who were African American, but he's actually kind of expanded. He's done a lot of paintings around the world where kind of looking at people of the various African diasporas. So he's been to Brazil, he's been to the Caribbean, multiple parts of the Caribbean, to Haiti, and in each part of these world making paintings based on those people that he meets. And and so lastly, I wanted to end on this piece because although a lot of the art we've seen, contemporary art and the modern art, has been pretty successful at making political points, I think to a certain degree, there's there's a sense that like no matter what kind of political statement you make, it still is not really subverting the powers that be. And I think Jenny Holzer gets at that to a certain degree because in a way, if it's not actually subverting us, the you know the citizens of the world and the consumers of the world, if it's not subverting us, it's not really subverting the powers that be. And I think with this piece, she kind of hits that nail on the head perfectly. All right, that's where I'm going to end. All right, I will see you when we start Unit 7.